Hi all, I have another very interesting game to show you coming out of the YourNextMove Rapid event, which was played in Leuven, Belgium. Magnus Carlsen was playing against Vladimir Kramnik. We have a very interesting first move, the bird's opening. So very interesting choice here. This is like playing a Dutch defense in reverse, really, especially the way Black played now d5. This is like Dutch defense in reverse, and in particular we get the Leningrad variation, and I quite enjoy playing the Leningrad on occasion with Black against d4. So usually this is the sort of plan. You sort of play later the fianchetto, you play for sometimes e4, e5, and we have e6, which hems in the bishop and kind of defines White's square play on the dark squares later. These dark squares are going to be occupied or controlled by White. Bishop g2, bishop e7, we see castling, and now b5, d3, bishop e7, queen e1. So this is a fairly standard plan in the Leningrad to go for e4, e5. Black's keeping a grip at the moment on that e4 square, and potentially gains more space now on the queen side. So c5, c3, Black castles a4, trying to weaken Black on the light squares a bit. Black obliges and kind of weakens his d4 square in a way by playing b4. Could he have avoided this concession? It seems like a central square concession. If he plays a6, this should be okay for Black. It seems okay. So b4 was played. It looks as though a small concession is made here after c takes this d4 square. King h1, knight c6, bishop e3, eyeing that square. So both of these squares trying to be controlled at the moment. Now this looks to go to b3 to help control d4. Bishop f6 attacks actually this pawn. That's protected. Rook e8, knight b3. White's increasing the grip on the dark squares now, particularly d4 with this move. a5, and now g4, as though g5 could be on the cards to drive away the bishop away from this diagonal. Black tries to keep the bishop on that diagonal to be able to retreat, for example, like here. Queen f2, and does so voluntarily now. Bishop g7, knight bd4. We have an exchange of knights. Rook c8, and now after rook bc1, in fact Black takes on d4 and takes on c1. Now pins that knight. We have rook f1, unpinning, well, kind of making sure the queen's not hanging here if the knight wants to move. But also there's a potential threat of f5. Now maybe this caused an overreaction, this perceived threat of f5. It seems technically this move might not have been the best response to play f6. Interestingly, a move like b3 might actually be interesting to consider, and just allow f5, because the concrete issue seems to be about crashing through with f takes and queen f7. If that can be addressed with rook f8, then e5 is on the cards here, and it's not entirely clear if White's attack is making any progress here. It's about equal technically. If White goes for it, then yeah, with precise moves Black should be fine, maybe even able to take that pawn in some circumstances if White plays badly. Okay, so it's tricky, but this is a possibility that f6 may have been slightly compromising to Black's position here. h4, rook f8, as though e5 might be on the cards. King g1 provides greater flexibility in the event of e5, that there's an option to take with both rook and king. And in fact, this option is made great use of now after knight b3. This looks at the a5 pawn, and you might think black shouldn't really take here, surely, because a5, if white takes on a5, this is a potentially dangerous pawn in the future. But black did this. He took on f2, perhaps more stubborn, for not giving white any advantage, because sometimes to take is a mistake, as Igor Smirnov says. And here maybe is an interesting example of that. That perhaps black should wait for white to take, because if, say, bishop a8, if white ever took, then there's an immediate tempo gain hitting a4. So if a5 drops, a4 will drop. But here in this game, after queen takes f2, white decides to take with his king. He doesn't mind swapping his f4 pawn for this. After e takes, these pawns are doubled in any case. Knight takes, bishop a8, and now white also gets that c file. With the threat of knight c6 now, would be threatening bishop d5 after. We have knight e5, seems quite dangerous. That's protected. d4. And here perhaps the most accurate move might be knight c6. For example, in this position, this a pawn seems to be just queening. There's no pinning there because of bishop d5 check. And you see one of the problems with f6 earlier emerge. But knight c4 is a strong move as well. In this position, white's basically in the driving seat. He's got two major trump cards, that passed outside pawn and this c-file control. So black's in a difficult position in any case. So knight c4 is played here. We have bishop takes f3. And now, not this disaster move, which can occur sometimes in blitz. Knight takes d3 would be a total disaster, forking king and rook. But knight takes e5, and now we see desperados from both sides. Instead of black casually retaking here, he plays bishop takes e2, and white now, instead of taking on e2, plays knight d7. For this desperado now, knight takes f6 check. And the upshot is this endgame favours white actually, because of this outside pawn here and the weakened pawns here, which are all on a kind of skewering line. In fact, these three pawns are on a skewering line. It's like, they say rooks on the 7th are like pigs on the 7th because they eat a lot of pawns. But here, because of this arrangement, I think there's a pig on the 4th here, basically. If we look at this position, if black tried this, just b3, and we're looking forward to a pig on the 4th. Basically, these three pawns, I mean, I don't know what we do about them. It's it looks as though rook c4's a gigantic threat here, just picking off a load of pawns. Yeah. So this is one of the reasons why this endgame, it seems black's overcommitted all his pawns here. Black plays check, in fact, and now king f7. White doesn't even go for any pawns now. He plays a5, just making this even more dangerous. g5, a temporary pawn sack to try and activate the king. Rook c5 protects that pawn, as well as threatens rook b5 to b6 to try and drag this pawn further. f3 with the threat of rook e2 check, and maybe trying to get behind this pawn. Tarrasch rule, rooks behind pawns. That's taken. Check. Rook takes a6. This pawn is now threatening just a7. And after rook d1, rook a5 prevents the rook going behind the pawn. And black's own pawn is easily stopped with the king here. So a hopeless position. This pawn is now queening. Or the king's just munching this and helping the pawn queen. Let's have a quick, just to quickly show. If d2, a7, so if we just try and block the pawn, this is hopeless as well. Actually, it's just too late. So totally gone position. Okay, so Magnus Carlsen won with the birds opening, a kind of Dutch Leningrad in reverse. some of the interesting points about this game. Maybe the threat is stronger than the execution. Nmd's threat is often stronger than the execution. Was actually, by the way, originally heard from him in relation to someone threatening to smoke. He said that, you know, you must know that the threat is stronger than the execution. But anyway, it became a popular phrase. But anyway, f6 seems to be because of the threat of f5, and f6 later in key variations, this diagonal was tactically useful for that check. You know, king on this diagonal is often dangerous when the f pawn moves. So later white got an outside pass pawn to take as a mistake, another sort of echo principle, where black seemed to give white an extra tempo, you know, to win this pawn and get that past a pawn. And the endgame seemed to have overextended pawns by black. So just ready to fall off, basically. So a very, very interesting game. Hope you got some points from this game. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks very much.